You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday 15th of August 2014. A legal Nigerian immigrant works as a nurse for 10 years and escapes punishment. Former Romanian policeman jailed after threatening to kill wife, and we get to fund his cancer treatment. Syria, British jihadist shows off bomb prowess. Russia, Ukraine, EU to hold talks on gas and trade. The Muslim colonists of Egypt and Iraq. Islamic State militants grab new weapon, Iraqi wheat. An American who never quit, Marine Staff Sergeant Liam Dyer, on Grand Prix racing after losing leg in Afghanistan. Thought for the day, our tolerance of the multiracial society and the price. And finally, married jokes. UK news. A illegal Nigerian immigrant works as a nurse for 10 years and escapes punishment. An illegal immigrant nurse who worked as a nurse for 10 years has escaped punishment. Clement Ogunmoyo flew in from Nigeria on a forged passport given to him by a friend in 2002 and worked illegally for different care homes. Ogunmoyo claimed he had absolutely no idea the documents were bogus and worked for 5 years at Thackeray House Care Home, Croydon, London. During initial investigations, Ogunmoyo admitted knowing the passport was a fake, but then told the Nursing and Midwifery Council he didn't think it was after all. Concerns were first raised over Ogunmoyo's immigration status in 2013, 10 years after he started working in Britain. One officer told the panel in central London that there were no records of Ogunmoyo entering the country in 2002. Nor were any details of a visa application ever recorded. Jane Kivlin, panel chair, said the panel agreed that one potential explanation for the lack of records of your entry into the UK was that you had entered the country under a different name. However, the panel noted the evidence that the computer system was considered to be flawed in its early years of operation. The panel was unable to conclude on the balance of probabilities that you had entered the country illegally on the basis of the lack of records of your entry. Again, the panel agreed that all of this was possible. However, as set out above, the panel simply did not have the evidence before to bear it out. Ogunmoyo was found to have lived and worked in the UK at various care homes for over 10 years illegally, without a valid permit. The panel had insufficient evidence to suggest that Ogunmoyo had done this purposefully, and he escaped further punishment. World at 8. The panel needs to be replaced. Ogunmoyo clearly has operated outside the law and they're afraid to deport him, which should be the punishment. He deliberately put himself in care of vulnerable people. But then we Brits don't really care about that, do we? Former Romanian policeman jailed after threatening to kill wife, and we get to fund his cancer treatment. A cancer-suffering former Romanian policeman who assaulted his wife of 21 years and his son told a court he didn't want to return to his homeland on his release from prison. Narcis Eo said he would become homeless and jobless if he didn't stay in the country, despite his wife Veronica's pleas for him to return. Gloucester Crown Court heard the 40-year-old of Tennyson Road in Dursley had been ill and his wife had sold their car, her jewellery and belongings, as well as taken out a £23,000 loan to pay for his treatment. She told the court she was working as a care assistant, a job she loved in a country she loved, to pay back the money, and although she wanted a divorce, she was happy to continue paying that back, but wanted him to leave the country. She told the judge there was a different culture where they were from. Defending, Sabir Patan said he had a very good job, a well-paid job as a police officer, and was in the Romanian forces for 19 years. He's not able to return to Romania as he would not have any employment prospects. Patan added Eo's house there was in arrears and he would lose that as he was not able to pay the mortgage. Judge Jamie Tabor QC said he had no powers to make Eo return to his homeland as it was in the EU. The judge sentenced him to 54 days in custody, which he has already spent, and ordered him not to contact his wife except by phone once a week for the next 7 years. World at 8. And now we get to fund his cancer treatment. Syria, British jihadist shows off bomb prowess. A British jihadist who'd once warned the UK to be afraid of his terror skills has apparently posted photographs of his handiwork with a homemade bomb. A British schoolboy turned jihadist who appeared in a recruitment video for Islamist militants in Syria has apparently boasted online of blowing up a building with his own homemade bombs. A Twitter account believed to belong to Nasser Mutana displayed before and after photographs of a building at a Syrian army base that had been reduced to rubble. The photographs came a month after the 20-year-old from Cardiff warned that the UK should be afraid of his terror skills he's learnt in the Syrian war. World at 8. In a normal country, with normal officials, this guy would be deported or got rid of and his family. However, we in England seem to have lost all rhyme and reason with migrants and their offspring. European news. Russia, Ukraine, EU to hold talks on gas and trade. The presidents of Russia, Ukraine and the European Commission will hold consultations on the gas and trade issues dividing them, the European Union said in a statement late Thursday. The move comes ahead of Friday's emergency meeting of foreign ministers which will debate the situation in Ukraine. The EU's executive body issued a statement following a phone call Thursday between Commission President José Manuel Barroso and Russian President Vladimir Putin, their second conversation of the week. It was agreed to hold consultations between the presidents of Russia, Ukraine and the European Commission on the issues related with the implementation of the association agreement as well as on the supply of gas in parallel with the efforts to stabilise the political and security situation, the Commission said. The EU said concrete plans for the talks are still to be decided. However, EU officials said they would include direct three-way face-to-face talks among the leaders. The EU had already held some high-level talks with Russia and Kiev on ways to implement the bloc's recently signed trade agreement, the association agreement, with Ukraine in ways that will limit the fallout on Russia's economy. There was also a series of unsuccessful ministerial level meetings between the EU, Russia and Ukraine attempting to resolve a gas dispute. Russia's state-owned energy giant Gazprom has since switched off most gas supplies to Ukraine because of unpaid bills. Kiev says Russia has unfairly raised gas bills. The gas talks were due to resume in early autumn, an EU spokeswoman said earlier Thursday. The involvement of the three presidents could give them added momentum. Tensions between Russia and the EU over Ukraine have increased recently. In late July, the bloc imposed its toughest sanctions yet on Russia over Moscow's annexation of Crimea and involvement in eastern Ukraine. Russia retaliated last week by banning many imports of EU agricultural products. However, EU officials have also been encouraging Kiev to push again for a diplomatic solution to the conflict in eastern Ukraine, even while the bloc refused to criticise Ukraine's military offensive against pro-Russian rebels. The coming three-way consultations and this week's phone calls between Mr Barroso and the Russian leader represent the most significant diplomatic contact between the two in many weeks. World news. The Muslim colonists of Egypt and Iraq. Ezekiel Doini, writing for the Gatestone Institute, reminds us of a little-known or remembered fact. The Yazidi in Iraq and the Christian Copts in Egypt are not occupiers or settlers, neither are the Jews in Israel. They are both victims of a common enemy that seems to want a Middle East free of non-Muslims. The current Palestinian narrative is that all Muslims in Palestine are natives and all Jews are settlers. This narrative is false. There has been a small but almost continuous Jewish presence in Palestine since the destruction of Jerusalem by Rome 2,000 years ago. And, as we will see, most of the Muslims living in Palestine when the State of Israel was declared in 1948 were Muslim colonists from other parts of the Ottoman Empire who had been resettled and living in Palestine for fewer than 60 years. World at 8. I have to agree with Ezekiel about the Copts and Yazidis, but the Jews invaded Palestine over 3,000 years ago and set about wiping everyone there off the face of the earth. Islamic State militants grab new weapon, Iraqi wheat. Reuters are reporting that after seizing 5 oil fields in Iraq's biggest dam, Sunni militants bent on creating an Islamic empire in the Middle East now control yet another powerful economic weapon, wheat supplies. Fighters from the Islamic State have overrun large areas in 5 of Iraq's most fertile provinces, where the United Nations Food Agency says around 40% of its wheat is grown. Now they're helping themselves to grain stored in government silos, milling it and distributing the flour on the local market, an Iraqi official told Reuters. The Islamic State even tried to sell smuggled wheat back to the government to finance a war effort marked by extreme violence and brutality. An American who never quit, Marine Staff Sergeant Liam Dwyer, on Grand Prix racing after losing leg in Afghanistan. Marine Staff Sergeant Liam Dwyer lost most of his left leg in 2011 to a bomb planted by Islamist militants in Afghanistan. Doctors told him he would have to give up on his dream of racing rally cars. If you can't work the clutch, you can't race. But Wired tells how a mix of high-tech and low-tech ingenuity got him behind the wheel and how his commitment helped make him a rising star of Grand Prix racing, even though he's still on active duty. In fact, the Marines were wary of letting Dwyer race at all. They told me, "This is dangerous, you're going to get hurt," says Dwyer. And I was like, "You're the ones that sent me to Afghanistan, a place where I almost got killed, and you're worried about me getting into a car accident." 3 years later, Dwyer is doing far more than simply operating his Nissan's manual transmission. He's flourishing as rookie on IMSA Continental Tire Sports Car Challenge racing circuit, where he has already had 1 win. World at 8, what an inspiration this guy is. We wish him all the luck in the world. It's a lesson, never listen to certain people, just do your own thing. Thought for the day, our tolerance of the multiracial society and the price. A lot has been said for the intolerances of certain people and the resulting wars and really nasty deeds. But there is a brother to intolerance, and that is tolerance. And as usual, these words can mean equally the same and equally different acts and attitudes. I'm today going to highlight a few and also the price that we in the UK and Europe pay for the Western love of tolerance for its own sake. It is the British tolerance of massive immigration into this country over the last 60 years that has brought a wave of misery to our people, our culture and our socio-economic structure. You may say, how and why has such a good act brought all this about? For many years, nationalists have tried to bring the long-term problems of immigration to the notice of the general public and indeed our governmental bodies, but to no avail. We've been vilified, hounded, prosecuted, bankrupted and at worst ignored for trying to bring what is now a fairly acceptable subject for the blurbs to discuss into the open. But is it all too late? We have the accepted face of tolerance staring back at us, with headlines from the media of NHS hospitals and GPs too full to really cope, rampant jihadism in the education facilities, as well as the results of foreign overbreeding evident in our classrooms and universities. Large swathes of land formerly used as either grazing or arable land being buttonholed for the various local councils to build thousands of homes, the inside of which, if you are young, white and poor, you will never see. Grooming and rape still being practised in heavily Islamised areas in our country. Race riots between different ethnics or sects are still underreported if at all, and if you look down the court hearings in any enriched areas, you'll see that it is mainly old or new ethnic minorities who feature heavily in the crime stats. I just looked at the one for the North London and the majority of the names are not English, and where they are, many are black or mixed race. My point being that I know we Brits have always had our own retards, rapists, burglars and killers. We really have no business being tolerant to the point of importing more of them with a wider variety of crimes to their names. Not only from the point of having to feed and water them for years in our overcrowded prisons, but court appearances and appeals and our own legal aid costs money, and it costs a vast amount of money to the British taxpayer, of which very few of these foreign criminals have ever paid into for any length of time to be of value. Slap translators cost onto it, and they are not the only ones laughing all the way into a cushy prison sentence. But very little is ever said of the increasing number of foreign criminals we are allowing to stay on in this country, even when they are originally illegal migrants, because according to people who do not pay into our tax system anyway, These wrecks are allowed a family life in this country to be paid for by us. Now this is stretching tolerance to new levels. In this day and age when our own young from our own tribes have no chance in hell of ever getting onto the housing ladder, let alone having a couple of kids of their own. So when does tolerance become intolerance? When does the politically correct tolerance become enabling minority communities to commit socio-economic genocide against the original inhabitants of a country which has become unwittingly their host through being tolerant in the first place? Where and when does racial tolerance stop? When does tolerance turn its face and present an intolerant visage? When there are no white faces left and no churches? When there are no Indigenous MPs or councillors left? When our prisons, schools and hospitals are entirely staffed and filled with foreigners of all descriptions, creeds and cultures but our own? Will we still be encouraged to be tolerant when second or third class citizens in our own country, or rather what was our own country? Will tolerance be the 11th commandment from the Quran, albeit a very warped version thereof? It would seem to me as a nationalist this very odd but very British view of tolerance is heavily biased in favour of one section of our very mixed nation, and that is the followers of Islam. We are told to be tolerant of them no matter what tricks they get up to or what is allowed to be printed in the media or on the national news. It has become the national mantra: be tolerant of Muslims and their culture or you will be called a racist or worse, an intolerant bigot. We are now supposed to sit back and tolerate the following: Muslim jihadists living here and spreading their word without being arrested for sedition, our affordable housing being let to foreigners as a matter of course, our NHS and GPs having to treat foreigners, and indeed most foreigners can overcome the postcode lottery just because they arrive on our shores. Free schooling and preschooling for foreign children is automatic and they're taking places from our own children in the better state schools. Lack of the implementation of English being mandatory before entry into this country has set back our education system by years and 4 years. Large foreign communities spread like a cancer throughout this country. It doesn't matter whether they're from Europe, India, Pakistan, Africa, the Far East, the Middle East or Timbuktu. They are not welcome and should not have been tolerated for all the years that they have. We give a few Nepalese mercenaries a good pension but then tell them to stay here, bring in their villages and breed, and wonder why we've now got large Nepalese ghettos in the south that look like a slum in Kathmandu on a very bad day. Tolerance has brought us, the indigenous people of this land, misery, and I mean misery, into our lives. Tolerance is not mentioned in the very many cases I've dealt with where foreign people have moved into a street, and within a few months more of their own ethnicity follow, and then the trouble starts. Whilst our resident tribes are being tolerant, they are being subjected to abuse and harassment on a daily basis, which makes their lives intolerable, whilst they are being encouraged by the police and local councils to be tolerant themselves. One case we're handling under the Profan banner is a family in Surrey who are unable to use their garden because of the racial abuse they are receiving from an Algerian man and his family next door. During the very hot spell we've just had, the white children were indoors, not allowed to go out into their own garden, which was the advice from the local plods, whilst the foreign kids next door were creating the usual mayhem in theirs. Now this is where tolerance becomes a laughing stock and where intolerance should and needs to be practised by the local officials and indeed us Brits. So you see that tolerance can become intolerant to the people who have been indoctrinated to practice it since the end of the last war. Everything has been set up, thanks to various governments in the EU and the Commonwealth, to be the mother country to a huge amount of migrants who really should not be here at all, but are encouraged to come in order to make the Brits even more tolerant than they have been, virtually saying bend over and here is a large jar of Vaseline to help you. Just glancing at a new Couples Come Dine With Me and my tolerance level bottomed out. The TV, always good at portraying British and Britain as it should be, have really hit the ghastly tree and every branch on the way down. After fast forwarding about 8 of the programmes, it became apparent that our tolerance level has been reached on the desirability of miscegenation on a grand scale. There was only one programme that had 3 white married couples in it, and that was one held in Scotland. All the rest seen had blacks married to Asians and one woman who was apparently part Portuguese, but what the rest of her was I don't know. Suffice to say she resembled a chattering huge roly-poly cartoon of Ed Miliband on a very bad day, and she was married to a West Indian. Not one black or white was married to their own kind, which doesn't bode well for future birth rates of the white race on this island. There was of course the usual mixture of couples, mainly white, who didn't live together at all, homosexuals of both sexes who did, and the largest amount of joint winners I've ever seen, just so that no one was intolerant of not winning. It was just ghastly, and a true picture of what tolerance has brought to this small island over a fairly short period of time. We've been encouraged to become tolerant of many things that we were never tolerant of in the first place. Immigration of course being the main one, but there are other things that fill the mantra of British and European tolerance stakes. We've been encouraged mainly in this country to be tolerant of alternative lifestyles, to the point of having babies being taught to masturbate and choose their sexuality early in life, when the whole point of childhood is to allow them to avoid those subjects until they're old enough to choose. We're told to be tolerant of the Church of England virtually backing down on every rule in the ecclesiastical rule book via the Marxist government. We're told to be tolerant of halal meat and the various very nasty foods being imported into this country without even asking why. There is so much more we're being told to be tolerant over that it makes one wonder what the powers that be have in store for us as a people. Well, knowing that the EU has made a rule that there is no such thing as an indigenous British person and that everyone who is born in this country is British, I suppose we have to be tolerant of that as well. In fact, everything that the British tribes have to be tolerant of is something that 100 years ago would not have made us tolerant at all. There would have been civil unrest had we been bullied into being as tolerant as we now are. Now is the time for intolerance on a grand scale. No more should be the mantra, but even then we are still being told that we must be tolerant of the new and the old diseases being brought in on a daily basis unreported, as it would stir even the laziest Brit into a form of intolerance. We are witnessing the intolerance of Islam in Iraq towards the Yazidis, whilst we've been told to be tolerant about their treatment of Christians at the same time. I would say as a nationalist and a human being that I'm very afraid that the UK and Europe will take in, under the name of tolerance, thousands of these poor folk who really should stay near their homeland. Note what I said, near, not in Iraq. Due to our tolerance of being a bolt hole for any disrupted or unhappy peoples, our Britannia has become a rubbish dump for the intolerable. Any unhappiness or genocide in the world usually from intolerant Muslims, and the UK once again opens its arms to what are in effect foreigners by any other name. Why should the UK continue to tolerate foreigners on an unequalled level in this day and age? Why can't people be discouraged from coming here? We are already full. We were full 30 years ago. Indeed, we were full during the times of the great Enoch Powell, a man who has since proved tolerance was the wrong way to go, and that a healthy smattering of intolerance would have been a lot better. The ancient Roman Empire ceased to be when it became tolerant, and looking through history, tolerance has ruined more lives than intolerance, because once put on, the coat of tolerance becomes a coat of armour that is turned against itself, its country, and the people who practice it. Tolerance is another word for submission and acceptance in the world today, and intolerance is the word for self-belief, self-love, self-preservation and united nationalism. And finally, married jokes. A guy went into his kitchen and his wife was standing there preparing their usual soft-boiled eggs and toast for breakfast, wearing only the t-shirt that she normally slept in. As he walked in, almost awake, she turned to him and said softly, "You've got to make love to me this very moment." His eyes lit up and he thought, I'm either still dreaming or this is going to be my lucky day. Not wanting to lose the moment, he embraced her and gave it his all, right there on the kitchen table. Afterwards she said thanks and returned to the stove, her t-shirt still around her neck. Happy but a little puzzled, the husband asked, "What was that all about?" And she explained, "The egg timer's broken." And an elderly couple, Margaret and Bert, moved to Texas. Bert has always wanted a pair of authentic cowboy boots, so seeing some on sale he brought them and wore them home. Walking proudly he sauntered into the kitchen and said to his wife, "Notice anything different about me?" Margaret looked him over. "Nope." Frustrated, Bert stormed off into the bathroom, undressed and walked back into the kitchen, completely naked, except for his boots. Again he asked Margaret a little louder this time, "Notice anything different now?" Margaret looked up and exclaimed, "Bert, what's different? It's hanging down today, it was hanging down yesterday, it'll be hanging down again tomorrow." Furious, Bert yelled, "And do you know why it's hanging down, Margaret?" "Nope," she replied. "It's hanging down because it's looking at my new boots." Without changing her expression, Margaret replied, "Shoulda bought a hat, Bert, shoulda bought a hat." You've been listening to The World at 8. I'm Lynn Mozart, and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend. And 2. Nor were any details of a visa application ever recorded. Jane Kivlin, panel chair, said the panel agreed that one potential explanation for the lack of records of your entry into the UK was that you had entered the country under a different name. However, the panel noted the evidence that the computer system was considered to be flawed in its early years of operation. The panel was unable to conclude on the balance of probabilities that you had entered the country illegally on the basis of the lack of records of your entry. Again, the panel agreed that all of this was possible. However, as set out above, the panel simply did not have the evidence before to bear it out. Ogun Moyo was found to have lived and worked in the UK at various care homes for over 10 years illegally, without a valid permit. The panel had insufficient evidence to suggest that Ogun Moyo had done this purposefully, and he escaped further punishment. World at 8. The panel needs to be replaced. Ogun Moyo cleared.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday 15th of August 2014. A legal Nigerian immigrant works as a nurse for 10 years and escapes punishment. Former Romanian policeman jailed after threatening to kill wife, and we get to fund his cancer treatment. Syria, British jihadist shows off bomb prowess. Russia, Ukraine, EU to hold talks on gas and trade. The Muslim colonists of Egypt and Iraq. Islamic State militants grab new weapon, Iraqi wheat. An American who never quit, Marine Staff Sergeant Liam Dyer, on Grand Prix racing after losing leg in Afghanistan. Thought for the day, our tolerance of the multiracial society, and the price. And finally, married jokes. UK news. A illegal Nigerian immigrant works as a nurse for 10 years and escapes punishment. An illegal immigrant nurse who worked as a nurse for 10 years has escaped punishment. Clement Ogun Moyo flew in from Nigeria on a forged passport given to him by a friend in 2002 and worked illegally for different care homes. Ogun Moyo claimed he had absolutely no idea the documents were bogus and worked for 5 years at Thackeray House Care Home, Croydon, London. During initial investigations, Ogun Moyo admitted knowing the passport was a fake, but then told the Nursing and Midwifery Council he didn't think it was after all. Concerns were first raised over Ogun Moyo's immigration status in 2013, 10 years after he started working in Britain. One officer told the panel in central London that there were no records of Ogun Moyo entering the country in 2000. He has operated outside the law and they're afraid to deport him, which should be the punishment. He deliberately put himself in care of vulnerable people. But then we Brits don't really care about that, do we? Former Romanian policeman jailed after threatening to kill wife, and we get to fund his cancer treatment. A cancer-suffering former Romanian policeman who assaulted his wife of 21 years and his son told a court he didn't want to return to his homeland on his release from prison. Narcis EO said he would become homeless and jobless if he didn't stay in the country, despite his wife Veronica's pleas for him to return. Gloucester Crown Court heard the 40-year-old of Tennyson Road in Dursley had been ill and his wife had sold their car, her jewellery and belongings, as well as taken out a £23,000 loan to pay for his treatment. She told the court she was working as a care assistant, a job she loved in a country she loved, to pay back the money, and although she wanted a divorce, she was happy to continue paying that back but wanted him to leave the country. She told the judge there was a different culture where they were from. Defending, Sabir Patan said he had a very good job, a well-paid job as a police officer, and was in the Romanian forces for 19 years. He's not able to return to Romania as he would not have any employment prospects. Patan added EO's house there was in arrears and he would lose that as he was not able to pay the mortgage. Judge Jamie Tabor QC said he had no powers to make EO return to his homeland as it was in the EU. The judge sentenced him to 54 days in custody, which he has already spent, and ordered him not to contact his wife except by phone once a week for the next 7 years. World at 8, and now we get to fund his cancer treatment. Syria, British jihadist shows off bomb prowess. A British jihadist who'd once warned the UK to be afraid of his